Okay.
So we left off yesterday with the question about the difference between the soul and the psyche. And what remains after.
It's a bit confusing when you use English words and Hebrew words.
So what should I do?
I don't know what the word psyche means.
Psyche?
Yeah.
Psyche is anima, it's nefesh. I don't know.
Uh-huh. Where did you get these translations from?
These names in the first place,
Yeah.
to even connect them, I think is a Greek thing. I don't think it's a in the
No,
Torah.
I get mixed up between the Hebrew and the English, and I don't know what you're referring to.
So nefesh, ruach, neshama, yechida. So we usually say psyche, spirit, soul, for the three lower levels, and then there's no good translations for the top two
Chai
levels. Chai, yechida. So we just say the living one, the singular one. I've never heard a good translation for chaya yechida. Actually, chaya would be more like anima, but it doesn't make any sense because anima is like the nefesh behemoth, or nefesh chiyunit, really. Mm-hmm. Nefesh chiyunit is anima.
No, living is more appropriate.
Okay. It's very interesting why it's even called that. Why is it? Adam the nefesh chaya. In any case. So the whole chiddush of giving the Torah Mount Sinai was to give us the potential, the preparation, to prepare the souls for the possibility of revealing the infinite when they would have a body. That's the purpose. So let's go back to V'anyanu ki alidei Torah u'mitzvot, by Torah and mitzvos mitgalei yichud or ensof baruch hu b'nefesh ha'adam kanoda. And that was the day before Sunday's Tanya.
Mm-hmm. Why did each soul have to be there to get this preparation? Why couldn't they just make the same preparation when you take the soul and say, okay, now you're ready to go down to the world to come? So you've got to keep the Torah, and
it's a tremendous problem that a lot of people miss, that it's impossible for us to imagine what the infinite really is, because we judge everything by our mind, and our mind is finite in its capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So most people don't realize that. They don't think about it long and hard enough to realize that how could there possibly be any connection between the finite and the infinite? I mean, it just can't be. The sun does what it does, regardless of whether I understand it or not.
Right.
So what I used to think about the sun, let's say 200 years ago, that there was some kind of great fire burning there, that didn't change the fact that the sun was always a fusion reactor, a big fusion reactor. But from the human perspective, there's this limitation on reality. You naturally limit reality and can't really imagine what it's about. So when it comes to Hashem, all the more so, you have no conception, and we invent all kinds of explanations. So that's why the normal academic viewpoint is that mitzvos in Torah, they evolved out of some conception that people have, that they'll control nature. And if I do this and this, nature will act so and so. But the truth is that nature doesn't care. It doesn't know whether I did this or did that. Why would it? There's no... If I chop down a tree, nature knows, it reacts because I just did something. But if I mutter some words, what does nature care? If I eat matzah on Pesach, what does nature care? It doesn't care. So you have to make some kind of bridge between the infinite and the finite for this to actually work, and to actually make a different claim than we're just trying to manipulate nature. Idolatry.
Whoever said we're trying to manipulate?
Because that's what idolatry was, and idolatry was all an attempt to manipulate nature. So if you assume that all religions are the same, and Judaism is just another religion, so of course we're trying to manipulate, and it's a bunch of mumbo jumbo. It doesn't mean anything. So if you're working within the confines of nature, within the finite, so really it's very hard to argue differently. I don't know how you could make a different argument. What other argument could you make? We found the real recipe. we found, that's how a lot of people imagine Yiddishkeit. They think that when it says that there's science in the Torah, or that the Torah contains everything, so that must mean that there's mRNA vaccines in the Torah somewhere. We figured it out before Moderna. We figured it out before the guys in the 1990s that started with mRNA. It's not true. We didn't figure it out. We didn't have any secret teachings that we taught, and we know how to do these things. We're predicated on something completely different. We're not trying to manipulate nature. We don't think that what we mutter, or what we say, or what we eat, or where we go, or how we do things is going to manipulate nature. It's not going to change it. What changes nature is the fact that God bridged the gap between the infinite and the finite. And since God is the creator of the finite in nature just as much as the finite in us, He decided that there will be some kind of relationship between doing so and having this and this reaction. It's not because it's built into nature. It's got to go outside. It leaves our dimensions. It goes somewhere else. It's sort of like the question of, if you were living in flatland, which is like the famous two-dimensional world that some guy invented a long time ago in the early 1900s. He did it in a series of comics or something like that, or books. And if in flatland, I'll show it to you here, if I was here and you were standing here, or you were a line, there's no way I could cross over. Because in flatland, the line that goes from here to there is just it's a border. It's just a border. You can't jump over it. So if you want to get over it, you have to somehow depart from flatland into another dimension, and then you'll get over it. So that's one way of envisioning that, by Hashem creating a bridge between the infinite and the finite, and allowing us to participate in that bridge, then that allows things to change in nature, even though within nature you don't see the change, because in the two-dimensional flatland you can't see the relationship. It's like you disappeared here and you suddenly appeared on the other side of the line, and there's no explanation for why. There's no explanation for why that worked. There's no. So you have to introduce something like this, like some kind of connection between the finite and the infinite. And again, you don't do it because you want to manipulate nature. You do it because you want a connection with the infinite. Because otherwise, everything you do in life is, and that's, again, what somebody would say, in the end, there's so much of religious practice that's done in order to try to retain eternity. Trying to grasp eternity so that my life is not in vain, so that it doesn't just pass. And so I try to do things that will have significance forever. So normal people, they build hospitals. They put their name on it. Okay. People who are touched by the giving of the Torah, so they say there's a lot more than I can do. It's good to build a hospital also, but there's other tzedakah that I can do, and it's infinite. And there's many other actions that I can do, and they're infinite. Okay. So that's basically why you have to have this connection. So for us to say that a mitzvah reveals the infinite in reality, we have to assume that there's some kind of bridge that was created. So that bridge is what is discussed in the giving of the Torah as breaking down the barrier between the heavens and the earth, between the infinite and the finite. That Hashem had to build that bridge for us. Whatever, and that bridge is very interesting. It's just in the Torah. It's just things that you say and you do. And that's what he says now. He says, what can we do? That the nefesh, the psyche itself, the human psyche, is changing. It's a changing aspect. That's what we talked about yesterday. And it's nothing. In any case, it's finite, which means it undergoes changes. And there's no, here's that word. What sort of
changes is he referring to then?
So we always said that anything that's ayin leyesh, everything's from nothingness to something, from nothingness to being, is it moved from the realm of infinity into the realm of finiteness. And in the finite realm you find change. And so it's just using a shorthand. Ve'ein aruch, here's that word that we discussed when we're walking. Ein Aroch is the Kabbalistic concept. There's no commensurability, there's no exchange rate between the creation and the creator. Because everything in creation is finite. So what can you get? It's also a silly thing. Again, if you're frum and you understand that Hashem is infinite. So the first thing that would have happened to you was, well, there's no way to serve him, because why would anything have meaning? There's nothing that I could do that would have meaning.
But he wrote in the Torah what he wants you to do.
So now you're explaining that he built a bridge, and that he wants there to be finite events that have meaning for him. But without that piece of the puzzle, you remain be'ein aroch. If you're only Kabbalistic in your thinking, so you're left with, it's not that Kabbalistic thinking doesn't, well, I'll say it like this. If you're a frum Kabbalist, if you learn Kabbalah and you're first of all frum, so you have your questions, but you sort of put them aside and you say, but we have halacha, and this is what we do. But I don't know if it doesn't bug them in the back of their minds. Everything I've learned in Kabbalah is that it's Ein Aroch, so how in the world does this matter to Hashem? So maybe he thinks it doesn't matter, but this is how halacha is, so that's what I do. Okay? Or at least it's symbolic. And the actions are symbolic. Symbolic of what? Symbolic of all the teachings that I've learned in Kabbalah, because the Arizal connected all his teachings to practice, to mitzvahs. So I do this mitzvah, I have this kavanah in mind. I do this mitzvah, I have this kavanah in mind. And the main thing is davening. And there I have all the kavanos in mind. But when you're not from, like Lightman or the Kabbalah Center, so they come to the logical conclusion, which is unfortunately part of the logical conclusion of Kabbalah, when you have Ein Aroch, incommensurability, which is that the mitzvahs are not so necessary. At most they're folklore. Why? Because are you kidding yourself? You really think that something finite can have a relationship with something infinite? There's no real way that you can. How are you going to span that gap? You can't.
So what have they done with their Sefer Torah and the list of mitzvahs?
They think that it's like a spiritual energy. Some kind of... I'll say it like this. They can't completely throw out that there must be some kind of link. But if you do it in one place, you don't need it in other places. Meaning, the link between the finite and the infinite is just one thing. So they do it with the Torah. So they read the Torah because it's good folklore. It gives them a sense of community. But also they claim this is what gives you the infinite light, which is true. But then you don't need it from matzah. If you don't want it, you don't need it. You don't have to keep, certainly they're not into the lotase, into the prohibitive mitzvot. They don't get the meaning of that at all. Because why would lotase have any meaning? It's not a bridge. If anything, it's a barrier. So they come to their logical conclusion. That's one of the issues with Kabbalah. The Kabbalah didn't develop this concept of nisiat hafachim, of there being opposites or paradoxes. And the paradox really is that the finite is with the infinite now.
But you had these guys who lived in Yerushalayim who were big Kabbalists and super Haredi.
Yeah, because they were Haredi to begin with.
So what does the Kabbalah do for them?
It gives them a whole symbolic framework for understanding what they're doing. But again, the question remains, if between every world and every world there's Ein Aroch, there's no commensurability, so how do you break the gap up to the Ein Sof itself? You can't. Even say it like this. What I meant before, that the reading of the Torah is so important, is because the Arizal says it is. It's very interesting. The reading of the Torah is just, at most it's a Derabanan. Okay, in Shul, on Shabbos. At most it's a Derabanan. But the Arizal puts there, and in Bris Milah, there's only two places, that he puts a Kavanah in Ein Sof. That somehow in the infinite you're now doing something. So those are the two important rituals. So the Mila, circumcision, I understand. That's the Oraisa. It's the first mitzvah that Avram received. The reading of the Torah is like a Darabanan. Where did it become so important? For the Rizal, it is. So suddenly you have a Kavana in Ein Sofa. So that everybody latches onto. That becomes the most important thing in the world. Chassidus doesn't accept this whole picture. It says it's partial picture. It's good, but it's very partial. It's missing. What is it missing? It's missing paradox. And the paradox is that in the smallest act that you do, the infinite can be revealed. But for that bridge to be created, that's what the giving of the Torah did. It bridged the gap between the infinite and the finite. So there had to be some kind of preparation. But the preparation is not just in the world, because you don't see that. When I put a penny in the pushka, I don't see the infinite. Again, it's not like an atomic bomb. Atomic bomb. I don't see it. Maybe it happens. So Tanya says, and he's saying the same thing here, that you're right, that in the physical world, you can't see it yet. But it is being revealed in the psyche. In the nefesh, it is being revealed. That's where this is. And for that, there has to be a preparation.
What's the value of the revelation in the nefesh? Because the nefesh is also part of this world down here.
If you think that that this is the end of the story, so you're right. So what did you gain? You didn't add too much. But if you understand that in the end, everything that's collected in the nefesh, everything that's collected through these actions, in the, call it the spiritual wellspring of the soul, will eventually be revealed. So you understand that eventually these actions will be seen in the physical world as well.
But isn't the nefesh directly connected to Kodesh Baruch Hu?
No, so he said the neshama is. The neshama is one with Hashem. But it's a creation. What? And the nefesh is a lower part of it.
The nefesh is part of the neshama.
And the nefesh, it's an aspect of the neshama that is now enclosed in the changing world. Okay. So it needs to be enclosed in it, because otherwise the changing world, the material world that we live in, would have no meaning at all. So there must be some spiritual agent here, and that's the psyche bringing the soul down, or giving the soul a connection with the physical world, so that when you do a mitzvah, it's actually a mitzvah. You actually moved something. You actually took the coin and the coin has meaning, and so on. But in the end, you don't see the full meaning of it at all. And that's what's going to be revealed in the future. But you're right, if it's just at the moment. So just at the moment, you get all these stories. Look, I gave him stuck, and look what happened. Or all the stories with the Baal Shem Tov. Again, the Baal Shem Tov gave somebody, or the dollar stories with the Rebbe. It's the same idea. That here, this coin is a little bit different than the rest of the coins. How is it different? Because here we have a neshama that's already revealed. And the capabilities of this neshama, of the Rebbe's neshama, of the Baal Shem Tov's neshama, is different. It's already manifest in his psyche. You see what he's able to do. What is he able to do? So the Rebbe would laugh at you. He'd say, I don't do anything. And he'd say, Hashem does it. That's what we mean. That's what we mean. We mean that the infinite came down into the finite. So when the Rebbe gives a blessing, it actually does something in the physical world. So when he gives you $1 to give to tzedakah, so people exchange $1 for something else, and the $1 that he gave them, they hold on to it because it performs miracles, as it were. It's not performing any miracles. It's just manifesting this infinite energy that was created by the mitzvah.
So how come Birchas Kohanim works? How come Kohen can give a bracha to someone, and the bracha comes true?
It's the same thing. We don't have a question about it, because Hashem said so. Here's a bridge. I gave you another bridge. When you use the bridge, you get direct connection with the infinite. So something, is it fully manifest? I don't think it's fully manifested. I don't think we've seen the full meaning of these things yet. Why do we not see them? Because still there's still a gap. There's still a veil on reality, and that's the veil that we talk about being removed when the redemption comes. that the Sovev, which is the infinite, will be revealed within the finite, within the Memale. Okay, that's the main thing. So he says, so how can there be a connection? They're incommensurate. They're ein aroch, the creation and the creator, even the nefesh, even the psyche and the creator. כי נשגב שמו לבדו, רק הודו וזיוו של שמו על ארץ ושמיים. So his name is exalted forever. Exalted means that he's removed, that there's no connection, it's incommensurate. The only thing that appears here is his splendor, hodo, vezivo, and the aura from his light. But again, from his light means from his revelation. V'kedoshim hem anshamot b'chol yom ya'alu chasela. But the kedoshim, the ones who are holy, who's holy, the soul is holy, it will praise you daily in sela. And the word sela, chol makom shenemar sela bli hifsek, is eternal. So from this verse in Tehillim, from Tehillim 148 that we say every day, kedoshim b'chol yom ya'alu chasela, we have the source for the neshama being able to tap into eternity. And this power came from the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. ואיך יתגלה בייחוד אור אינסוף ברוך הוא ממש בעסק התורה ומצוות. הרי אם יעשה אותם איש עובדי כוכבים מזלות לא ימשיך כלום, ולא יהיה גילוי אור אינסוף ברוך הוא על ידו כלל. It's not the act. You have to have the preparation. So if a non-Jew, he comes and he learns Torah, so he says, doesn't do, sorry, bad choice of words. If a idol worshiper, not a non-Jew, because about a non-Jew it says something different. If an idol worshiper comes and decides that now I'm going to sit down and learn Torah, is he going to bring down anything from the infinite into the finite? No.
The computer is not plugged in.
Okay.
There's no email.
It's not connected. There's no preparation for it. So there will be no revelation of the infinite light by this act by him. So here they translate and they say that this was because of the censors. They say that he meant a non-Jew. But it's not so simple, because by a non-Jew it says that there's a medrash, and the Rebbe quotes it in different places, that Me'idani alai shamayim va'aretz, I bring testimony before the heavens and the earth, that every man or woman, whether they're a Jew or not a Jew, when they decide to dedicate themselves to Torah, they will receive a revelation.
So who's this B'nai Noach?
No. I just think that here he really meant it. He really meant an idolater. And if you don't believe in God, it doesn't work. If you don't believe in the infinite, if you don't have any connection with the infinite, so it really won't work.
So this was B'nai Noach. It's only relevant if you say it's because Moshe Rabbeinu says.
Yeah, maybe. In that sense, many of the non-Jews are already B'nai Noach. If that's the main need, the main requirement, that they believe that the Torah was given by Moshe, then if at least they believe that the Torah is infinite, it's something different. It's a bridge between the infinite and the finite, so that already changes their status. They're certainly not idolaters. Again, an idolater is somebody who just believes in the end that there is nature. All idolatry is a form of pantheism. Of the world is God. All idolatry. There's no idolatry possible if you don't believe that the world is God. The moment you believe God is more than the world, you're not an idolater anymore. The moment you make God bigger than the world, you're not an idolater. That's the opposite of idolatry. All idolatry in the end is pantheism. It's a form of pantheism. רק לישראל ניתנה זו במעמד הר סיני. Only the Jewish people were given this status, this preparation, when they were given the Torah at Mount Sinai. להיות להם כוח והכנה להמשיך גילוי אור אין סוף ברוך הוא ממש בעסק תורתם ועבודתם. And gave them the power and the potential to bring down the infinite light through their learning Torah and their mitzvos. ועל כן ניתנה התורה ברעש ובקולות וברקים. And that's why the Torah was given with a lot of noise, with lightning and thunder. ויחרד כל העם אשר במחנה. Why? We'll see in a second, but we learned this last week. Why was it needed? Why did it have to be given with a lot of thunder and fear? They were fearful. The same thing we learned last week. Last week we saw that in order to see by Ma'amad al Sinai, that's by the splitting of the sea, we said the first thing was Vayiru ha'am et Hashem. They feared God, and then Vayaminu b'Hashem u'b'Moshe avdo. They feared the lower Yud Kei Vav Kei, and thanks to that, because they were able to nullify their understanding. And fear, in this sense, is something that allows you to nullify your limited understanding and to accept that there might be something greater than what you understand. That allowed them to get a glimpse of the higher Havaya, the higher concealed reality. So the same thing here, that there had to be fear before the heavens were split. So just as when the sea was split, there had to be fear before. There had to be before the Torah was given and the heavens were split. For there to be something new, it can't be something from something. In the mashal that we know, the famous parable, that for the seed to bring out something new, it has to first of all rot in the ground, and return to being nothing. By nullifying, by returning to nothingness, the seed can bring out new growth. Something new can come out. Same thing, Kach Bishat Matan Torah, same thing happened when they gave the Torah. The noise, the lightning, and the thunder, and the fear, by these things, they came to a true sense of nullification. In other words, bitul b'mitziut mamash is like saying that they began to see themselves not from the inside out, but rather from the outside in. That's a big shift. It's very difficult for people to see themselves from the outside in.
How did you see yourself from the outside in?
Tough.
What does it mean?
What does it mean? So there was a guy in Vienna who was one of the first people who tried to translate Chassidus into some kind of spoken language that people understood, people would understand. And his name was, now it escapes me, and he was a disciple of the Pia. He was a disciple, I don't remember of who. I have an article on him here, and I forgot already what it says.
A Jewish guy?
Yeah, it's a very frum guy. He's a chassid. I read his book when I was 25, I think. It suddenly became popular. So this is from some Daniel Reiser, who was a professor at Herzog. And he wrote an article. It's called Mesmerism, Hypnosis, and Jewish Mystics in Vienna in the Early 20th Century. Already an interesting title. But it's academic. He's not trying to convince you of anything. His name was Menachem Eckstein. And he was it's called Tna'ei HaNefesh Be'asagat HaChasidut, was the name of his book. The mental conditions for achieving Hasidism. And he tried to use mesmerism, the development of mesmerism that was around at the time. It's not so. Again, this is a beautiful example of that. Anybody who learns Torah doesn't necessarily believe some scientific theory. Mesmerism was considered to be scientific for a while. It still is, as hypnosis. Mesmerism was a lot more complex. It was something called fluidium. It was a very complex theory that the guy, his name was, it wasn't even Mesmer who did it. It was somebody even before him, who had all these theories about there being some kind of energy in the world, and that's what hypnosis uses, and it was much more complex. So Eckstein, who was a chassid of, I don't remember who he was. I guess
But I think Eckstein is a rabbinical family. I think there's even Eckstein in
No, it's not Epstein.
Eckstein.
I don't know, is a rabbinical family. I don't know. He had here whose chassid was.
Eckstein, who came from England, who came on the end.
I don't remember who. A friend of his who was very interesting. We talked about him. This is where I learned about this. A good friend of his was Aaron Marcus, who I told you his granddaughter was Freud's wife. And Aaron Marcus is a tremendous Talmid Chacham, and is really a revolutionary figure that for some reason is not so well known. Interesting things were going on in Vienna in turn of the century with Yiddishkeit. Anyway, he knew all the Rebbes. I think he was, I don't know. Eckstein was, I don't know who's chassid. But he was, so he developed this whole thing of trying to help people achieve what Chassidus talks about. For instance, in this mimer, the state called Bitul B'Metziut Be'etzem. So he didn't connect to Chabad. I don't know why. But it turns out that in not Chassidus the way it is today, but Chassidus the way it used to be, at least 100 years ago, they talked more openly about the same concepts that Chabad still talks about. But even in Chabad, you can say that not many people talk about it today. So this concept of Bitul B'Metziut Be'etzem really means to see yourself from the outside. So Reb Isaac of Homel, he gives a simple explanation, and I've mentioned it before. He says, it's like the moment when you get on a merry-go-round. You got to think of the big ones, not little ones. But you get on a big one that has, the horses and whatever, and suddenly, as you step on it and it's revolving, it's rotating, for a moment you lose your footing, and you're thrown off, and it's because you're no longer the center. But you can get dizzy and all these things. These are symptoms, physical symptoms, of not being the center anymore. Okay? And the same thing happens spiritually. If you can take yourself out of the center, meaning the world is not revolving around you, but that rather you, like everything else, is revolving around something else, then that's what this is. And great fear does that for you. Meaning, great fear is like suddenly, it's this experience that people have when suddenly their world falls apart. They're no longer the ones organizing it. This happens when, there's a guy who's suddenly arrested for murder, for something that he thought he had gotten away with. And his life is, moving along after what he did. And then suddenly he's arrested. And in one moment, your whole life is shattered. So that's the type of feeling that they have, but not because they murdered anything or anybody, chas v'shalom, but rather because they suddenly realize the center of the world is not me. You suddenly realize what the center of the world is. It's Hashem. And you're revolving around Hashem. So I talk a lot about this. The Ruzhiner, he was asked, he was in the 1810s, again, 1815, the theory of geocentrism was already supplanted by that time by heliocentrism, the sun being in the center of the solar system. And he was asked about it. And they asked him, so what does it mean? How could it be? So his answer was, because now that's what the tzaddikim want now. So what do you mean the tzaddikim want? It's because the inner meaning of what he's saying is that it's not good for a man anymore to feel that he's the center of the universe. It's now time, meaning he has so much is going to happen now that will give you so much power that if you feel that you're the center of the universe and everything is for you, to serve you, you'll abuse that power that's going to be given to you. So the tzaddikim, they makdimim trufa l'makah. So they decided from now on the world is going to look as if we're revolving around the sun, not the other way around. Truth is, it doesn't matter which it is. It makes no difference. But mathematically, it's just easier to describe it as we're revolving around the sun. So that's what it looks like now. So that's what people think. What's that for? Not for the scientific part. The scientific part could work either way. It doesn't matter. The difference is that for our psychology, it's now become important that we not be in the center. So Eckstein, he wrote in his introduction to this book, The Mental Conditions for Achieving Chassidus, achieving a Chassidic mental state. So he writes, you need to try to imagine yourself going out of the world and looking down at yourself from above. And it's very interesting that a lot of people who have a near-death experience, that's what they feel. But they don't understand what the meaning is. They think, oh, the soul departed, and I wasn't alive. No, you were very much alive. Because the point is, you came back. So you didn't die. But you were in such a state of shock, or such a state of such a strong impression being made on the psyche by being so close to death. That's exactly what's described as parcha nishmatam. Right? That's exactly what we experienced in the giving of the Torah. There was a feeling of my soul departed my body.
They took flight.
Okay, it's like a near-death experience. And what do you get from that? You get this understanding that you're not the center of creation, the world is not revolving around you, and at that moment you can understand something higher. So Eckstein, it's very interesting to read his introduction. He has a whole theory about how to do it, and he guides you on how to do this mental imagery until you can do it. I don't know if it's really possible. I remember Menachem Eckstein. He's a Menachem Mendel, but he's not Chabad. I don't remember what it was. If anything, he's somehow related to Kotsk, but I don't remember. Yeah, I think he was named Menachem Mendel after the Kotsk Rebbe. His yahrzeit is.
Don't know.
You don't know. Today's Kaf.
Yes.
Tomorrow's Kaf Aleph.
Yes.
And on Thursday it'll be Kaf Beis.
Oh.
And Kaf Beis is the yahrzeit of Menachem Mendel of Kotsk.
Okay.
So it's a good thing we mentioned him today. So that's basically what this did. Okay, and that's what he's saying here. That this fear that caught them, this fear that affected them, it allowed them to change their perspective. It allowed them to achieve the state called bitul b'metziut be'etzim. There's not very many times that the Alter Rebbe mentions this type of bittul. Okay, it's very high. Here he says bitul b'metziut mamash, but it's the same thing as bitul b'metziut be'etzim.
He was a Zichov Chassid.
Jikov, right? Jikov. He was a Jikov Chassid.
Died in the Holocaust.
Okay.
Did you know that?
No. But he was young when he met Marcus. He was in his 40s, so yes, it makes sense. We continue.
The book's even in English. Okay.
Yeah, I have its book in English somewhere here. If you want to read it. So you need to have this nullifying, this coming out of yourself, almost like a near-death, not almost, but mamish, near-death experience. And suddenly, once you have that, you can't see the world anymore, the same anymore. I mean, but unfortunately, if all you have is the near-death experience, and you haven't had, and you're not, say it this way, people who've had a near-death experience and have gained the insight from it are very insightful about themselves, but they have no clue about the world. It doesn't mean they know what to do. It doesn't mean they have any idea about what's right and wrong. They just know that they're not the center of the world. And that's a huge step forward. I don't have that. I don't think I have that. But I have something else. I have the Rebbe. And they don't get this. Some of them go and they teach and they say, and you're very impressed because here's a person who's not thinking about themselves, because at any moment you can re-experience this thing that I'm not the center of the world. I can't do that because I've never really felt that. So I'm always stuck in myself. So somebody who looks at me teaching, or somebody who looks at me acting or doing a mitzvah or whatever, they'll see there's an egotistic guy here who's doing what he thinks is good. But having that doesn't mean that you also know what's right. Meaning, if you haven't learned by somebody like the Rebbe, then you don't know how the world's supposed to be. You just know how you're supposed to be. So you have to get the Torah afterwards. That's basically what this is saying. Hashem can take you out of your sense of centeredness of self-centeredness. But that's not enough. You then have to receive Torah. You have to go under the tutelage of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay? So al yedei bitul yesh le'an yimshach le'em or chadash michinat or en sof baruch hu mamash, and that's the infinite light that came down. Liot giluy en sof baruch hu mamash benafshotam. So it allowed us all, in the end. When I said I don't have it, what I mean is I don't have it in this lifetime. I've never experienced it that way, but I have it from Mount Sinai. That's what we all received. We all received this ability to be bebitul mamish. And bebitul mamish means that when I do a mitzvah, in the end I don't care. I really don't care in the end if I gain from it or not. I'm willing to do it because Hashem said so. I'm not looking for my reward. I'm not looking for... It's not that I'm not. I also am. Okay? But I have part of me which stood at Mount Sinai that allows me to do an act, a mitzvah, in a way that in the end I'm not looking for the reward. In the end. Right now I am, because I'm screwed like everybody else is. Okay? Because I experience the world in the self-centered way that everybody does. But inside, and this the Alter Rebbe says many times in different places, every Jew would be willing to give up all the reward that he has from a mitzvah. Even though at this moment he won't. Okay? At this moment he'll tell you, Lech mipo. Of course I want the reward. But that revelation at Mount Sinai, that gave us the ability that now when we receive the mitzvahs, when you know what to do, that inside we all have a residue of this ability to go outside of ourselves and to not seek the reward. We're not doing it for the reward, or we're not doing it for any kind of motive. And that's what's called revealing the infinite and the finite. The infinite and the finite, really, when you translate it into words, it means that there's no rationale, there's no motive behind what I'm doing. Because we said that the infinite is incommensurate with the finite. So I can't explain to you why I'm doing it. Okay? If I say I'm giving tzedakah to receive tenfold, so that's commensurate. That's I understand how Hashem works. To say that the infinite is being revealed in the finite is to say that even though I may have in my mind this idea about I'll get tenfold and so on and so forth, in the end I accept the fact that there's no rhyme or reason for what I'm doing. It cannot be constrained into rational thought. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu means in our parsha when he says, do not fear, meaning don't run away. You should fear, but don't run away. Accept it. Accept this near-death experience. Because what? God has come in order to, and it's usually translated, test you. But test you is the wrong translation, he says. Perush nasotu milshon haramat nes. It's really in order to raise you, to elevate you. Because a nes is like a flag, a banner that you raise. שבא אלוקים בקולות וברקים עד שבאחד קולם כדי להיות להם ביטול במציאות כנ"ל. Is all in order to give you the sense, the inner sense of true bittul, true self-nullification, true ability to negate any kind of rational or motivated reason that you have for doing what he's going to tell you to do now. And you'll accept the fact that you can never fully understand why Hashem told you to do this. And so you do it really for the sake of following his words and not for any other motive. So you need to go? You don't need to go?